Well, thanks everybody for coming. My name's Craig Blansett, and what you're seeing here is an accumulation for maybe the past 30-ish years. I always bought guns because I like to shoot them, but even though these are target guns, I've never shot them, which is kind of ironic. The War Department replaced the model 1909 revolver with the model 1911 automatic, 45 automatic. And when they did that, in 1917 we entered the war, and then after the war, a lot of GIs came back accustomed to the Colt automatic. And in the War Department sent the first 40 model 1911s. They were assembled in December of 1911 and then shipped to the Springfield Armory in January 12th, or 1912. Well, in February 26th of 1914, just 3 years after the 1911, the Arms and Man magazine stated that this year, for the first time, Colts would be at the national matches in the Camp Perry national matches. So that showed the intense interest in developing the model 1911 into a target pistol. So anyway, the revolvers were all known as being more accurate, easier to shoot, and it was just customary for revolvers to be in target. But so the 1911s entered the matches, and as you can see where I've written, the guns varied in accuracy from gun to gun, and so several colonels and generals in the Army talked to Colt about that. And here's a picture of the U.S. Army in match target trials in the 1920s, and you can see they're using the model 1911, and they all have the model 1911, and they're trying to become proficient in it from a target standpoint. So how they first started working on it was adjusting the trigger pull. And so what they would do is they would file on the internal parts, they would file them and polish them so that they would work a little smoother, and they would give a less of a trigger pull, like a 4 to 4.5 ounce trigger pull, pound trigger pull. Whereas you just pick one, you just buy one off the shelf back in those days, you'd probably have an 8-pound trigger pull or something like that. So anyway, then at the matches, Colt had what they called the Colt hut at the Camp Perry matches, where they would do on-the-spot tuning of your Colt. So if you came up with, say you bought a government model and you came up and said, I'm not shooting very good with it, can you maybe change the trigger pull or something like that? Well, they would do that on the spot for a fee, of course. But then they also, in 1920, start offering match barrels for the government model. And these were hand-selected barrels, but they also had a slightly smaller bore. So what happened in 1929, we had the stock market crash and the Depression. And so the expense of target shooting was more than the average civilian shooter could do. The Army could still do it because they had government supplies. But what Colt did is they came out with the Colt Ace, which is is this gun right here. And if you look at it compared to a government model, slightly shorter. It's a 1/4 inch. The barrel is a 1/4 inch shorter. So, but it shoots a 22, which is cheaper to shoot than a 45. And so Colt came out with that, thinking that they'll attract more shooters. More shooters can practice with this. This is also the first large frame automatic that Colt put an adjustable rear sight on, so that they could use that for, windage and so forth, elevation and so forth. So they also, what they did is they hand polished the internals. And so what I have here is kind of a picture of a breakdown of two guns. One's a regular government model and one's a national match, where Colt has done this internal polishing. So you can see the differences between a regular 1911 and a one that's been hand fitted and polished by the factory. So in there, this is a counter brochure for the ACE, and it talks about the economic practice arm for servicemen, an accurate target pistol for all shooters. And so that's what they're promoting with the ACE, to be a more accurate, and you could shoot, is about 1/7 of the cost of shooting a 45 ACP. So then there was competition where in the late 20s, early 30s, these gunsmiths would hand fit your Colt to shoot more accurately. And this is one that was done in Florida by a gentleman named Harpe, Harpe. And you can see the extensive grip modifications. And then he's also got the 1911 mainspring housing, and by the late 20s they had the 1911 A1 with that hump back there. And so, and the other thing they did on this gun is they put a different barrel bushing on there that secured the barrel in the slide, so when it shot, it stayed true. And Colt would not recognize that as an accuracy issue until the late 60s.
Why not?
They were in denial. So this is a King gun sight, and this is a Harpe. So the King gun sight, the difference with it is they have a palm swell on the grip, and they also reshaped the 1911 A1 mainspring housing so that it fits your hand when you go to shoot it. So, and the other thing they had, that King gun sight had, that I think was really cool, is they had this kind of a plastic red on your front sight. But what they had was a mirror embedded into the slide that pulled in the ambient light. So when you look at this, it almost looks fluorescent, but it pulls in the ambient light so that you can know right where your front sight is. And then they also have a little white around the rear sight so that your aperture, you can see your aperture very distinctly. So Colt, not to be outdone, came out with the national match. And so that's what this represents. This is a regular government model and a national match. And it shows the internal polishing that you get with when you upgrade it to a national match. And the additional cost in 1932 was $4 to get all that plus a match barrel on there. And so what was interesting about the national match, you could also custom order it with a different front sight and a different rear sight aperture. So the typical 1911 would have a very thin, like a 1/10 inch wide front blade, whereas you could order this 1/10, 1/8, 1/12. And if you look at this one here, look how fat that thing is. That's about 1/8 of an inch right there. And then what was happening from like 32 through 34 is people that ordered the 38 Super were wanting a match grade Super. On the first ones, they had just match. They were trying to think of what do we call this? We have the national match already for the 45. What do we call the 38? We'll call it the match. And so they called it the match, and then they decided to change the name to Super Match, and they did that in 35. When they came out, it was about the same time they came out with the adjustable rear sight. So they came out with this adjustable rear sight, and a guy named Stevens that worked at Colt designed this rear sight. And if you ordered a gun with the rear sight, it cost like an extra $7 for it. You got this tool to adjust the windage and elevation of the sight. At the same time they came out with the adjustable sight, they changed the name to Super Match. So the roll mark is now Super Match instead of just Match. So then in 37, they came out with the Service Model Ace. So you're thinking, why in the world would they come out with another 22 when they already had one that came out in 31? That doesn't make sense. You could take this Ace and shoot it, but the problem is it would shoot like a 22. So there's really no kick or anything. It was like a 22 in a heavy gun, was literally no kick. Whereas this 22, the gas made it feel like a 45. So you could shoot for 22 prices, but it felt like a 45. And so the Army bought probably 95% of these guns. And they came out initially like this one, which doesn't look great, but this is like the average Service Model Ace. And it's blued. When the Army, after the war started, the Army started buying the heck out of these. Actually, the Navy bought most of them. They park them. So these are parkerized. The later ones are parkerized. Anyway, these are just an amazing development that Carbine Williams came up with. And he worked with Colt to make a gun that the Army really could use. They could give it to their soldiers or sailors, and they would practice with a gun that feels, looks, and shoots like a 45 for the cost of a 22. So then, after all these large frame autos came out, they came out with a Woodsman, what they call a match target Woodsman. And here's some advertisement for the Woodsman and for the Service Model Ace. So, and they showed officers that were shooting these guns and how proficient they were with them. So this is the Match Target 22, and you see these funny looking grips that they have, which gives you, a good grip feel. But what they called these were elephant ear grips. The only problem with these is when they'd ship them, these would break. Well, what they would do is they made a little walnut block that fit in here and supported these grips during shipping. And the Navy purchased a lot of these. So there were 16,000 of these, and when they, just like the Service Model Ace, in the war, they parked them. So you can find them parkerized, and they also cut down the grips, made a plastic grip that was about like that. And I've seen them at shows, and a lot of them are marked U.S., or they'll have GHD or something where they've been inspected. Colt came out with a conversion unit.
Yeah.
So you could convert a 45 into a 22.
Yeah, but the other way around, where you had an Ace 22 with a 45 upper.
Yeah,
And they sell them that way match.
And you could have bought that as well. You could have your service model Ace that's 22, and then have a conversion unit that goes from 22 to 45. Yeah. And they had those. They only made like 112 of them. Gotcha. It's just the reverse. But it's the same idea. You get all those pieces in there, the extractor, slide, the magazine. So on the other one, you would get a 45 magazine. Mm-hmm. See? And a 45, and there's a barrel in that gun. But you can see that this is that floating chamber right there. After the war, these all helped the Army and Navy and soldiers and sailors become proficient with sidearms. But after the war, the federal government, canceled all their contracts. In 42, they had packaged up all their civilian models, including the super matches, the national matches, these match target, they had all that stuff that they weren't selling to the Army, they packaged up and put away. But after the war, they stopped making national match pistols until the late 1950s, like 58 or something. Like I just said, match target woodsman in 2 different barrel lengths. To mimic the heavy barrel, they had on the new one that came out in the 40s and 50s, they had like a full, like you see on the Python and Diamondback, they had another underneath a lug under here that gave it that heavy weight. The barrels weren't as thick as these, but they were heavy, just to give you that extra confidence when you're shooting. And then they continued to issue conversion units. The one that I had pictures there is U-982 or whatever, and I think it was shipped to the Marine Corps or something like that. But then after the war, so during the war they started parkerizing those too. And then after the war they had some left over, but they were unnumbered, and they sold them, and they were unnumbered, so you can't trace where they were shipped to. So this shows you the numbers, the production numbers, and these are all target guns, so it's going to be less than the regular production gun. So the national match, around 5,300 mixed, fixed, and adjustable sight, but there are a lot less adjustable sight national matches out there. Super matches, approximately 3,500 mixed, fixed, and adjustable sight. Of those, more than half went to Mexico. And most of the adjustable sights went to Mexico. So the number, and so whereas the natural matches, I'd say probably 95% stayed in the U.S., whereas the super matches, probably 55% went overseas. So that's why when you go to a gun show, you might see 2 or 3 national matches, but no super matches. They're just not around. Anyway, and then Colt Ace, 10,935. So that the Ace is collectible. And then the service model Ace, 13,800. The deal with the service model Aces is you can't hardly find them in good shape because the Army and Navy use the heck out of them. I mean, they were a great tool to use that saved money, but it mimicked the 45. Match target woodsman, there were 15,000 of those. I'd say probably half of those or more went to the Army and Navy. And the conversion units, 2,000 pre-war plus 670 which were unmarked post-war, so unnumbered. So I would say of the conversion units, gosh, probably 90% went to the Army and Navy. I mean, they're just, a ton of them went there. And then I think this is Clay's question.
So did they do any in 38 Super or 38?
No,
Just the 45?
not until after the war did they decide to do that. The other thing that I didn't have in here is I brought one in, this nickel-plated super match. There are 19 of these. And I first got interested in Colts because my brother was in the Army, and he like, you know, when he got out, the first thing he did was go buy a government model. And I said, didn't you get enough of that in the Army? He loved it in the Army. I don't know why. But anyway, yeah, so he bought one, and then it kind of rubbed off on me, you know. So, but anyway, any questions? Oh, yeah, Dave?
Yeah, when did Colt come out with the Gold Cup?
In the 1960s.
1960?
Yeah, they first came out with like a national match, and then they trended into Gold Cup after that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did they all have Ellison sights, or were they?
They used those micro sights, I think, initially,
Okay.
which
You know
are
when they switched
very.
over to Ellison?
I don't, but the micro sights are very similar to this.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, one more.
More of a statement, it still just amazes me that linkage, functioning, invented in 1911 is still being used in pistols today. I mean, just the genius of John Browning is
Absolutely.
just amazing when you think how many of his guns mechanically are still around.
Look at the Browning high power.
It's
I mean, there's some great. He was a genius of geniuses.
Steve
Yeah.
Jobs of the gun industry.
Yeah, right. Anyway, that's all I had. Okay, well, thanks, everybody.
So what I have here, Colt 45, this one I got from the state just recently, and kind of with the help of Craig, was able to identify this as part of a contract from a man by the name of Joseph Lorch, who is a government contractor for Colt, who had been working, as a matter of fact, he'd been around for about 40 years as a contractor in Washington, D.C., providing Colt firearms of varying calibers to government officials and other people within Washington, D.C. as well. This particular model is a 5-inch single action Army. It's never been fired, will never be fired. When I did the research on it, I mean, I wasn't able to find much about Mr. Lorch, other than the fact that I know he had done contracting for Colt, but he did some also for Smith & Wesson as well. I've not been able to do anything else as far as research. Nobody's gotten back to me on that. Colt had realized that the war was impending, so they had to downsize production. They also knew that production of single-action armies had been starting to fade, but they realized with the contracts they already had with the government, those were starting to come in for the war. They had contracts from overseas as well. So what was imperative financially was for them to get firearms with money out of it rather than just these guns. And this still constitutes, really, if you look at the serial number, it has no SA on it, so that would make it a first generation of it. But it's still post-war, pre-war, because it was assembled after the war in about 1956. This one is Colt, also Colt, is an 1862 new model police. This one was somewhat based by Samuel Colt himself on the 1851 Navy and earlier on his 1849 .31 caliber. This is a 36 caliber 5-shot with about a 4.5-inch barrel. These were really popular about the time of the Civil War. They had about 28,000 of these manufactured up until 1873, when cartridges became more popular. Although even with these, you will find some of these had been converted to carrying cartridge as opposed to just cap and ball. This one does shoot. It shoots nicely, but I will probably rarely shoot it again.
I brought in a Colt single action army. This is a Marshall, and it's an artillery, so-called artillery. The real name of it is U.S. Colt Single Action Army Altered. And by altered, it means that it began life with a 7.5-inch barrel. And what happened was that the cavalry had, and they had them for quite some time. This particular frame was made in 1883. So I always wanted a, shall we say, a Wild West cowboy gun, which this certainly is. But what happened was that the cavalry got all the 38s in 1893, and very few of them went out to artillery units and to militia and a few other organizations in the military. And so the problem was that the light artillery guys complained because those long barrels with their holsters were poking their guys in the ribs who were riding on caisson boxes. And so they wanted to get some of the shorter barrels, of which the 38s had little shorter barrels, I guess. So, and then they finally had the good idea of cutting these down, so, because they had so many of them. So that's the story, and there is research to prove it. A side lever Hall carbine, okay? And it gets its name from this lever here. So actually the way it works is this: push the lever down, you can load it, okay? And the caliber is 52 caliber paper cartridge that goes in here, okay? Now to close it, a lot of these get bit very easily, so you don't close it with the lever, you close it thus, okay? And of course you just cock the hammer, okay? Put the cap on. This particular carbine there's a very interesting story with these Halls. This is the 14th model of carbine that Hall made, and they made 10,500 before they went out of business. Now, what's interesting about this, they made these from 1844 through 1855. And so those from 48 on had steel barrels. Well, why is that important? And it's important because what happened was these were surplused, and an enterprising individual bought them from the government at, I think it was $3.30 a piece. And then what happened was there was a General Fremont, Major General Fremont, who was presented with the possibility of buying 5,000 of these that had been rifled and rebored to 58 caliber. And so he bought them at $22.50, was
I
it?
forget the numbers, but it was it cost them like $2 to rifle them.
Exactly.
And change them. Say they had a huge profit margin.
Yeah, a huge profit. And J.P. Morgan was involved in that deal, by the way. And so that was our U.S. government at work, and he got fired, not necessarily for that alone, but the Major General was out of a job. But so, at any rate, the way you tell, this one should have steel on here, and it's been worn off because it's very light. But the way you tell is that you'll either have an 1848 date and it'll be rifled.
I picked up two really high finish Colt single action armies at our show. This one is a Bisley model. It was made in 1903 and has fire blue screws and the extractor, and it's really nice. But the guy told me he thought it was some type of a refinish. And I got to looking at it closer, and it really is. It's got a different colored bluing on the cylinder than the rest of it. So I suspect that somebody cracked the cylinder or something. But it is a very nice gun. The serial numbers and everything, and it has all three outside serial numbers are just crisp and beautiful. So I don't think it's refinished. I think the cylinder's replaced. And this one is about a 1920. It only has the one serial number. Real high finish nickel, but you can see where it's cracked. The nickel is cracked, and then the copper shows in a couple of places. It's a 32 Winchester centerfire. Very nice guns, both early 20th century.
My interest as a Spanish teacher was in pre-Columbian and in California and the early Spanish colonization that don't get to California gun shows that often. So, and that's probably the best place to look up those details. But, and then I started looking around and I found French dueling pistols, and I wasn't that quite interested in those. So I finally just thought, well, you know, I'll go online, and that didn't really produce what I wanted. But then I had this friend of mine that was at the gun show, and lo and behold, found some dueling pistols that were from Belgium. That was what was on the card at any rate. And I'm pleased with the gun, percussion, and some engraving on it that I think is interesting as well. But apparently this was proofed in Liège, Belgium. Apparently at that time period, it was quite an industrialized country because of the coal and iron deposits. And so they were able to produce guns at a much lower price than other countries. And apparently they were good at it as well, or I'm sure people wouldn't be going there. But this one, it said was proofed in Liège, Belgium.
I brought in two cannonballs. I don't want to do this.
Yeah, right.
That'll make you shout for joy.
Right. This one was found in southeastern Colorado by a good buddy and his dad. It was inside a cannon barrel, part of a cannon barrel. And they smashed the barrel off and pulled this out. I've had it for 20 years. I don't know how long they had it. This one, quite a bit bigger, was found outside St. Joe, Missouri.
I brought this in mostly for the uniqueness of it. I bought it, actually, Cindy and I got invited by a close friend of ours that was helping with an estate on a house and all the belongings, and there was a handful of guns. So anyway, they asked us over, we got to see them before anybody else and that kind of thing. And so he had them all laid out on a table and a closet kind of in the corner, and had 6, 7 guns laid out. Actually, it is a Smith 19 frame with a 4-inch Colt Python barrel. And come to find out, you know, he kept pushing this gun, and I told him I didn't know enough about it to make an offer on it. And, you know, it's in beautiful shape, and I just didn't know. I've heard of them, they call them a smolt, but it's a hybrid gun. But anyway, I brought it in just for its uniqueness. The information that I found back in the 70s, this was a $1,400 conversion. And which, that made me feel a little good, because I still had no idea what this gun was worth. But anyway, I shot it. It had Packmeyers on it, And I bought some aftermarket grips on it just to make the gun look nice. But anyway, kind of a unique piece. So a little more modern than everybody else here. So
So it's a 357?
yeah, yeah. And I shot 38s through it.